Good evening, everybody. Looking up at the ceiling today, it feels a bit strange. Really interesting session tonight planned for you about Down syndrome. So as Senkos, we're always looking to expand our knowledge and develop things. Down syndrome plays a quite special part for me because as many of you know, I studied science when I was at university. And one of my assignments that I had to write, I had a very strange science degree, but one of the assignments I had to write was about different genetic problems that arise, and one of them was about trisomy 21, which is the most common form of Down syndrome. And then when I went into teaching, I actually ended up with a student who had the rarest form of Down syndrome, which is called mosaic Down syndrome, which many people have not heard of. And mosaic Down syndrome, very often you don't actually identify it in children until much later because they don't have the typical facial features, they don't have the same learning difficulties. And of course, if you're a younger parent, you don't always get the screening either. So it isn't until they start school and you start noticing the differences that you pick up on some of these children. Whereas the majority of Down syndrome, I'd always assumed we would know about it. We would know before they started school and put everything in place. Anyway, tonight I'm delighted to welcome Jo from Learn and Thrive, who is going to take us through lots of strategies, information, and just all things wonderful about Down syndrome. Over to Jo.
And why I'm sat here talking to you today. So like I said, my name is... Thanks, Abigail. And we're really pleased to be here today to talk a little bit more about Down syndrome. So my name is Jo Ayathray, and I'm the CEO here at Learn and Thrive. And when the Sensible Senko team came to me and asked me to come and talk to you a little bit more about Down syndrome and how we can better improve the outcomes for our children and young people, I was immediately like, right, I need to talk about this. We need to talk about this. There's so many important factors looking at inclusion through secondary. There's all these different things impacting our children and young people right now. But actually, having thought about it and taken a breath, I think what we need to do is to make sure that the Senkos and the teachers and the education professionals and the teaching assistants in our both mainstream and specialist settings have the basic knowledge and skills around the learning profile of children and young people with Down syndrome. So I've reined in all of my other ideas, and actually I think what we're going to do today is take it back to the beginning, look at how we can be using the learning profile of children and young people to really improve our teaching strategies in the classroom. So first of all, let's go through what we're going to be looking at today. So let me just share my slides. Okay. So welcome along to the Supporting Pupils with Down Syndrome session. So firstly, today we are going to be looking at the learning profile of children with Down syndrome. We'll be looking at what they are good at, what they find more difficult. We'll then be moving on to look at how this really practically impacts teaching strategies and classroom learning and what we can be doing to better support our children and young people. Now, then the last part of this session, what I've chosen to do is to take a really, really brief look at reading for children and young people with Down syndrome. I think this is such a key area, and it's one of the few times that actually our children will need something quite different in their approach. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be fully included in the classroom when doing it, but we'll come to that a little bit later on in the session. So first up, I just want to talk to you a little bit about me and who I am and why I'm sat here talking to you today. So like I said, my name's Jo. I am the leader here at Learn and Thrive, and Learn and Thrive is a charity that is out there to support children and young people with Down syndrome and other SEND. Yes, everything we do is designed around the learning profile of children and young people with Down syndrome. But you guys will know that actually when you design curriculums, when you design resources, when you design learning approaches around that profile, and which we're going to talk about a little bit more later on, you will see so many similarities to a lot of the other needs of children with SEND coming into play. And what we found is when we initially started these projects, we focused purely on the Down syndrome community. Now, what has happened is actually now 50% of the people using our learning projects actually have other SEND diagnosis. The majority of those have a diagnosis of ASD. However, there's lots of other diagnoses within there as well, global delay, a whole variety of people using our projects. So please don't think that these projects are only for children with Down syndrome, and don't think because you don't have a child with Down syndrome in your class right now that looking at Learn Thrive projects is not for you. So that's first. So we are here to make sure that children and young people with Down syndrome or other SEND thrive into adulthood. So that's something that's really, really important to us. So we're giving them the skills and the knowledge they need to get that practically thriving into adulthood. So we run two main projects. We run our Teach Me To project, which is a project designed actually through COVID. So it was developed as a reaction to lockdown, where we found a lot of our, particularly our young children, were at home doing home learning. Schools were just unable to get the resources and the work out to parents. Parents were feeling exceptionally pressured to be able to develop and deliver whole learning programs for their kids at home. And it just wasn't practical, and a lot of people were feeling the pressure, you know, myself included. I have a daughter with Down syndrome who's 16 now, and that pressure can be really quite intense for parents. So what we did at that point was we linked up with specialist teaching services. We then came together and just did some really short key videos looking at the breadth of the EYFS and looking at how we could then do these little short videos, almost kind of carpet time-esque, and we'll show you some examples later on where the children and young people could access the learning. So things around maths, literacy, wider curriculum, it's all kind of covered through there. So please do, if you are working with younger children, go and take a look at the Teach Me To video library. There's over 70 videos in there now. And it might be that you do them with the children and young people in your care or in your classes, or it might be that you watch them just to get some ideas about how to pace your sessions, how to differentiate your sessions, how to more easily include the person with Down syndrome into your group sessions and your class sessions. You know, a lot of the research we did a while ago now with one local authority, where the whole local authority were using it with children and young people with Down syndrome. One of the key things that came out of that research was actually, yes, the children were benefiting from using the project, but actually it was the adults supporting them also found a huge amount of benefit by looking at how to pace a session, how to differentiate a session, how to use these visual resources in the most appropriate way. Was a real strength of the project. So while Teach Me To was designed to be used at home and in support groups like local charity groups, etc., a lot of schools have now been picking it up. So go have a little look. If that's the age group you're working with, see if it works for you. We've got highly specialised speech and language therapists as part of that project. So it's such a key need for our children and young people. So please do go and have a little look at that. Our other project is our Learning for Life project. This is a project designed for those in year 5 or 6, right the way through to adulthood. And what we found when we first started developing it is we felt that this would be used very much between that year 5, year 6 through to maybe year 9. And actually what we found is we have a huge number of people using it at the other end of the spectrum, you know, right through into their 20s. And it's really taught us how important it is to look at some of the challenges our older young people are facing and making sure that we are getting into those issues as early as possible. So Learning for Life is looking at the RSE curriculum. It's doing so through the lens of actually what are the practical skills and the practical challenges that our children and young people face. So it looks at things like what is public, what is private, what is appropriate touch, what is appropriate behaviour. You know, what do we do if someone is inappropriately touching us? How do we ask for help? There's a huge amount of safeguarding running through this. You know, what do we do in terms of getting dressed and undressed? What counts as a public space and a private space? What is appropriate behaviour? Even down to kind of personal space and how we interact with individuals. We look at friendships, how to make friends, how to end friendships, how to identify unsafe or unhealthy friendships. We're now looking at relationships, sexual feelings. We do a huge amount on puberty, looking through, you know, all the way from, you know, periods to erections. It's all in there. So we're building that project up slowly. So there's a lot of stuff that's currently at the primary curriculum stage, but delivered in a way that is appropriate for your older users to use. The way we approach it and the way it's presented is appropriate for older learners. So please do go and have a little look at that. So like I said, that's my role currently with Learn and Thrive. Previously, I've been involved in setting up another local-based charity where we provided education and speech and language services directly to children and young people. And that's where my passion really came. So I had my daughter 16 years ago, and in the last 16 years, I've been upskilling myself to make sure that I understand how I can best support my daughter. And kind of inadvertently, like these things happen, I've ended up delivering education services and supporting children and young people in schools, mainly through the Kent area. So, other than that, I am a school governor at a special school as well, trying to make sure that we're learning lessons there and making sure we're delivering the best opportunities for our young people. So what I've got for you now is just a really quick, it's a few minutes long video where it shows you a little bit more about Learning for Life. And then at the end, you will see some examples of the Teach Me Too videos. After that, we'll jump straight into looking at in depth at the learning profile of children with Down syndrome. So take a look.
Hi, my name's Jo. I'm the CEO of Learn and Thrive, but most importantly, I'm also a parent of a teenager with Down syndrome. We recently launched the Learning for Life project, and one of the main inspirations of this is a lot of my background in supporting children and young people with Down syndrome in schools, mainstream and special. We kept seeing the same situations repeating again and again, where children and young people found themselves in difficult situations or putting themselves at risk due to inappropriate behaviours or just merely a not understanding those socially appropriate behaviours.
These resources are really useful for our young people because they're so trusting and they desperately want to please the adults they're with. They show the young people how to say stop, how to say this is my body, this is what you touch, this is what I touch. And we're starting to see a big difference in the members of our group now who come in and are very appropriate in their greetings to people.
Learning for Life is easy to access. It's a free website. It has all the resources you need to download for free. It's easy, it's colourful, the videos are fantastic, and it takes you step by step through the worksheets. I've been using it with my one-to-one, but I generally believe that it will work with all children in all schools, all ages, because it is a fantastic resource.
The idea of Learning for Life is it takes the pressure off the teachers, it takes the pressure off the community group leaders, it takes the pressure off the parents and allows them to work on the programme step by step, and they're guided through with the right resources, the right worksheets and the right video sessions. And seeing them all together, having fun, engaging and continuing the discussion after the videos has been amazing.
Hi, I'm Jo. I watched Lucy talking to us about colours. She told us about the colours blue, blue, red, red, and yellow, yellow.
Here is the blue one. Blue. Here is the red one. Red. Here is the yellow one. Yellow.
Hi, I'm Holly. It's great to see you. Today, we're going to look at colours. But first, let's get ready with our warm-up song. Hello, hello, how are you? Let's clap our hands. Clap. Yes, you're right. It's the yellow circle. Last one. How about this t-shirt? Yes. This one goes in the green circle. Now we've sorted all of our items by colour. I wonder what colour the Teach Me Too team like best.
Okay, So what colour?
What about flowers? Hello. Good boy, Rupert. They are yellow. Yellow flowers. The yellow flowers, Jenny. Good looking, good girl.
Well. Okay. What colour is my bag?
Green. Good boy, Rupert. Green. Jenny, the bag is green. Good signing, good girl, green. Well done.
So yeah, that's a roundup of what the Learn and Thrive projects are looking at, and I'll talk through some of the reasons. You'll have seen some things on, particularly on the Teach Me Too videos there, about why we've used the written word in the way we do, and I think a lot of it will start to make sense to you as we go through the learning profile. So if you'd like to find out more, and please do remember, everything we do in terms of the projects for Learn and Thrive is free. It's free to use for you, it's free to use for families, so there is no downside to going along, checking it out, and just seeing if it's something that's useful for you. And we'd love to hear your feedback on that, so please do get in touch. You can use the QR code there if you'd like to go and find out more. So first up, let's look at inclusive education and why that matters. Children and young people with Down syndrome, you know, we know that the evidence base is out there, that they thrive in inclusive settings and inclusive mainstream settings when given the right support. Now, for a bit of context, I just wanted to tell you a little bit of a story of my daughter's journey. Once she was born, we went to see the paediatrician, and we had those conversations with her. Like, how can I help my daughter know? What do I need? What does she need? What's her pathway going to look like? And I had this lady who was, you know, an older lady, kind of sit me down and say, well, actually, you know what? She's going to go to the local special school, and then she's going to go on to this other special school, and then we'll be able to find her some supported living, and hopefully she'll be able to do this, and she might be able to do this. And at the time, I just kind of accepted that. I was like, okay, fine, that's what her life looks like. Let's go support that. And then very quickly, I kind of came home and thought, but just because one person said something doesn't make it true. And at the time, I was still working in healthcare settings. You know, I have, you know, I'm quite a science-based person. I like evidence-based practice. It's what drives me. So I thought, let's go and look at the research. Let's go and look at the evidence. Let's go and see what's really going on out there. And really quickly, it became very, very clear from the evidence and from best practice and from the guidelines. It's really strongly out there that children and young people with Down syndrome do better in all areas when they are successfully included in mainstream settings. Now, before everyone gets cross with me, I am not saying that specialist settings don't play a role for our children. There will be some children where that is the right decision. Every learner is unique, and we must respect that. And for some of our guys, that might be the case. But we also can't ignore the evidence. And the evidence has looked at that, also has taken into account level of need when doing that evidence. So please don't think, well, that's fine, that research project was probably done with the kids that were really able going to mainstream and the ones that weren't going to special, and that's why they're different, because that wasn't true at all. They did look into that, did take that into account, and they did measure that across so that that wasn't an issue. And within that research, it came out that they did better in all areas of learning. Now, that's academic learning, so that's actually academic in terms of maths, literacy, etc. But it was also in terms of social ability. It was in terms of inclusion in the wider community. It was in terms of accessing further opportunities in life. It was also in terms of accessing other relationships as well. The one area where they did struggle slightly more was in terms of having a really strong relationship, as in a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a best friend. But again, that study is quite old now, so it might be that actually where we've done a lot of work that in the Down syndrome community and making sure we're connecting our young people better through groups and charities and spaces, and you know, they're connecting with other people with SEND as well, that may or may not still be the case. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that yes, it's tough out there right now for mainstream schools, but if we can do this, and we can, because I see it done regularly, actually being in an inclusive mainstream setting will be the best option for a lot of children, young people with Down syndrome. And often there is this assumption that they might start primary. And I remember my daughter started primary school, and the first thing that the school said was, well, we'll see how this year goes, and then we'll make a decision about next year. And then we'll see how this year goes. And unfortunately, that approach to inclusive education was its downfall, because if you start the year saying, let's see how this year goes, then you've already lost the battle. And I think it's really important to say, right, this child is here until the end. How are we going to build a structure around this child to make that successful? Because that's when you start putting the long-term work in. That's when you start to scaffold it to make it work properly. If you're just trying to patch it to see how this year works, then inevitably that child will not be getting the best support. So we know that inclusive education leads to better learning outcomes. It also learns to better social skills and independence. The young people also have access to an enriched language environment. So it's really critical for their communication and cognitive development skills. And we see a big impact there. Now, like I said, we are not saying that specialist settings can't work. They absolutely can. But the key factor of whether or not that is successful is making sure that specialist settings have super high expectations around behaviour, but also really aspirational in their approach to learning, and to make sure that they are also using the syndrome-specific approaches to help those young people access the learning to the best of their ability. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the strengths of children and young people with Down syndrome. And unfortunately, some of these strengths in their learning profile will become a weakness when they're in a specialist setting. So you're going to have to put stuff in place to try and overcome that and to try and even that out. But I will talk more about that later. Now, the other thing that really needs to happen for it to be successful is teachers must be well prepared. And I think you have got to have a senior leadership team that genuinely believes in inclusion. And when I talk about inclusion, I mean it in the sense of the word of truly included. I'm not talking about integration. I'm not talking about a child that comes in and does mornings in the class and then goes off in the afternoon to go to a different setting, or is split across different places, or is out of the classroom more than they're in the classroom. I'm talking about children who are genuinely included in their settings. So to do this, I would strongly recommend that you, before that child enters your class or enters your school, that you go away and you read the Down Syndrome International Guidelines for inclusive education of children with Down syndrome in your classes, and that's special schools as well. It covers both. What's really brilliant is it will walk you through all the research, but will also walk you through a lot of the practical considerations and give you lots of practical advice and steps that you can take afterwards. So please do go and have a little look at those guidelines. So despite the challenges we currently have in including children with SEND into mainstream settings, and inclusive education should always be the preferred route where possible. Where inclusion is done right, it benefits all learners, not just those with Down syndrome. And I'll just kind of finish this as making a point really, is that I have supported children in schools of all different levels and ages, including my daughter who's only just gone to special school in year 11. Now, some of her peers who've gone through to that stage have been exceptionally academically able. They have been accessing some form of GCSE. They have been doing some form of qualification at quite a high level, and they have been able to manage themselves in mainstream settings. Brilliant. Well done for those guys. So pleased for them. That's awesome. That doesn't mean that if you're not accessing those levels, you shouldn't be in mainstream. And if I hear one more person say, but the gap's getting too big, I might explode slightly. So what you need to understand is when you are including a person with Down syndrome or a person with SEND into your lessons, you are differentiating out the learning and you are looking against their progress against themselves. Your role as a teacher or a SENCO is not to close the gap between them and their peers. Your role as a teacher or SENCO is to help them become and achieve the most that they can achieve for themselves. So my daughter was in year 10. She was still really successfully included, brilliantly successfully included in a mainstream setting, a 12-form school entry, so absolutely huge school. And they did this and she was still working at year 1 academic levels. You know, not across the board. Some were year 2, some were year R. We were looking at that around those ages. You know, her reading is a real strength for her. She's got a reading age of about 8 or 9 now. But, you know, lots of challenges there for the school. But actually, with the right support, the right attitude towards inclusion, and the belief that she belonged, they managed to really differentiate that out and keep her included in the classroom with her peers. And that has been absolutely essential for her building her own skills. But actually, I've seen so many young people succeed when the school has been committed to doing that. On the other side of it, I have seen some exceptionally bright, exceptionally academically bright children, young people, and I can think of so many right now, where they absolutely could have accessed mainstream secondary, where the parents and the schools have kind of gone, oh, you know what, this isn't for us, we're out, we're in special school. Mainly because actually between that year 6, year 7 break, you went round, you looked round the secondary schools and they all went, no, you know, we can't, we're not for you. This isn't a space for you. You need this, we can't provide this, we can't do this, we can't do that. And actually, if those people had changed their approach and thought, you know what, I might not be able to do some of those things, but these are the things I can do. These are the opportunities we can give you. This is what we can do to support you. Then they may very well have surprised themselves with that child or young person coming through, and they might have been able to access that space. You know, who knows how that might have impacted them in the future. So my last caveat on here is obviously every learner is unique. Okay, so I'm not saying that every single child that comes into your classroom is going to follow this learning profile exactly, because that would be madness. Okay, so this is us looking at them as a group, it's looking at evidence, and it's looking at research. Okay, so it's looking at how we can use the strengths to access the curriculum and provide the support needed for these challenges. So always best to start with what children and young people with Down syndrome are good at. Okay, so children and young people with Down syndrome are generally very good at learning by looking. Okay, so that's really key and a real strength for our guys. You'll see this through our Teach Me Too program a lot, that we use visuals all the time. And I know that's tough sometimes when there's not a lot of time, but I would say if you've got a child with Down syndrome coming to your classroom, you want to warm that laminator up and get it ready, because visuals is going to make all the difference. Using and learning signs and gestures, really key as well. Like I know a lot of schools will sometimes, you know, might have one person that's signing a little bit with them, or they might have somebody that's doing a bit. But actually, you know what? If you're supporting your child through sign and through gesture, you are not only going to be supporting that child, there will be many, many children in your class that actually will also get the benefit of being supported with sign and gesture. And you know what? It's going to hurt nobody. So you're doing no harm to anyone else by doing so. Now, this is always a bit of a controversial one, where actually learning to read particularly, and you know, sometimes less so the actual writing, but learning to read and write is a real strength for children and young people with Down syndrome. And that's why I've chosen reading to go through later on, because reading, we know, is the key to unlocking the rest of the curriculum. And if it's a strength for our guys, let's use it. Let's use it from day one. And that's one of the reasons you'll have seen on the Teach Me Too video you just watched, that even at that very, very early stage where we're looking at preschool and nursery age children, we are using the written word from day one. You know, we are looking at that, but I will talk more about that later. So learning from pictures and practical activities, that's going back to that visual sense, but all that kinesthetic as well, making sure that they're moving and doing. We'll be doing that a lot with our young people anyway. They're often great with social interaction and communicating with other people, learning and imitating behaviours and attitudes of others. I will go into that more. And following and learning structure and routine, really important for our guys. So let's go through that in a little bit more detail, shall we? So key aspects of the learning profile of children and young people with Down syndrome. So visual impairments. You need to be really, really aware that children and young people with Down syndrome, no matter whether they've got glasses on or they've had corrective lenses, etc., will have reduced visual acuity. Now, what I mean by reduced visual acuity is they won't see things in the level of definition that you will. So if you take, a picture, there's some great ones online actually that you can look at on the Down Syndrome Association website, where they've got a picture of a set of beach huts on the thing, and then what they've done is they've taken it and they just made it a little bit blurry and a little bit less distinct. Now, every single one of our guys will see the world like that, regardless of their glasses. Do not think by putting on their glasses that they've suddenly got full vision. They do not, which is why when we're looking at things like strategies that later on, there's some really key things that you will need to be doing for our children and young people with Down syndrome. And just to kind of give you a little bit of a story behind that is we were recently filming some work for our Learning for Life, so with some young adults with Down syndrome, and they were doing brilliantly. They are people who can read, and they were using the auto cue to prompt them with their reading, and we kept on saying, the writing moves up the auto cue and it hits a certain little red line across the video screen, and that's when they have to talk. We kept saying, wait for the red line, wait for the red line, and it took us about 45 minutes before one of us went round and sat with her and went, can you see the red line? And they were like, no, I've got no idea. Like, no, like they literally, because it was a fainter line across it, we could all see it when we were sat looking at the auto cue. We hadn't thought, can they see it? And I'm sure you will understand all about the kind of things that we need to be then looking at in classrooms, like, what fonts we're using, what size of writing we're using, what types of pencil are we using, is it thick enough, is it dark enough, are we giving them books that have got writing written over pictures, are we giving things in a really visually clear way? But we'll talk about that. So yeah, looking at fine detail recognition can be really difficult, and that will impact things like reading and engagement with learning materials in general. So always use high contrast visuals, big fonts, bold, uncluttered text. So hearing challenges. Now, hearing loss is super common for our young people. Glue ear in childhood, but also then we get some sensory neural loss, potentially in childhood, but particularly in adulthood moving forward. So it is often something that fluctuates heavily. It's really important to understand that those children who seem to be hearing okay will hit those autumn, winter months, and you might see big behavior changes. You might see something really kind of kicking off with them in the classroom and think, I don't understand. They're not engaging, they're not doing. Our kids can have such a huge impact for hearing, just if they're just snotty, they've got a cold. Unfortunately, we know with our guys, we've all been there, that there's certain times a year where snot is rife and it stays for months and it takes them a very long time to get over it. And if you've got a child who's forever got a bit of a cold in the background, who hasn't been diagnosed with a hearing loss, I would be encouraging parents to go away and make sure that's been checked, but also assume that there will be some fluctuations in their hearing regardless. Now, if you do have a child who's wearing a hearing aid or has a cochlear hearing aid, cochlear less so, because obviously that's less of an issue. But if they've got a behind the ear aid, then you need to understand that there will be massive fluctuations in their hearing, even with their aids, because those of us that know, again, for us, we have 3 monthly hearing appointments to look at her hearing aid levels. Realistically, unfortunately, with the NHS as it is today, that often ends up being a 6-month appointment, and the change that she can see in that time is immense. So look out for those signs. Look out for them to suddenly stop engaging. Are they stopped kind of hearing the beginning and ends of words? Are they taking longer to engage with things? Are they getting fed up quicker? Could it be actually that there's a hearing issue there? And make sure that we're putting in place things to support them there, back where they're sitting in the classroom. Always pairing spoken instructions with visual cues, which we should be doing anyway. And just really making sure that parents are keeping up to date on those audiology checkups, or at least chasing. Sometimes we desperately are trying to keep up to date, but sometimes it's about chasing that. And if you've got a hearing impairment and teacher involved, please do use their skills. They can be absolutely brilliant for our guys. So moving on then, looking at things like speech and language. Now, this will be the one thing that jumps out at a lot of you. We know that our children, one of our, I would say is the biggest barrier for our children is speech, language and communication needs. Now, this is really, really important. Receptive language is for the vast majority of our children significantly stronger than expressive language. Now, I'm sure you'll know what I mean by that, but for those that may not have heard that kind of language, maybe don't work with speech and language therapists that much, that means that they understand what they are hearing and what they are given significantly more than they are able to express to you. So the problem with that is that when we talk to people, and particularly when we talk to younger children, what we do is we kind of listen to what they're giving us and we mirror that level of language back. And again, the research tells us that we tend to mirror it back, but then we give them the next step. And actually, in terms of speech and language development, that's almost what you're trained to do, right? When your children are younger, they're coming through nursery year R, year 1, year 2. We're trained to say, like, if they come to you and say, oh, train, you say, yes, red train. You give them the next step in language. Now, if you've got a child with Down syndrome who understands the big red train perfectly well, but their language can only give you train, then you're going to go back and give them red train, right? So we need to be very careful that we are assessing their knowledge and not their language. Really, really key here that you need to give other ways of assessing knowledge that is not speech, because otherwise you're not going to be getting a clear level of their cognitive ability. And in doing so, actually, you're doing them a disservice because you might be holding them back from that next layer of understanding receptive language. So yes, you've got to work on their expressive language, but what your job is not to then hold their receptive language back until it meets where their expressive language is. Both can continue to grow and should do. So we need to be giving children other ways of communicating need, and that might be through symbol exchange systems, it might be through visuals, it might be through reading, it might be through AAC, through talkers, all kinds of different ways, but we need to be looking at how we can do that and how you can get that information from them. Now, one of the reasons why hearing and speech and language, and again, we'll look at in a minute, kind of cognitive processing, etc., can be really tough for our guys, is that all of our children, young people, have issues with phonological processing and being able to hold information in their working memory, so their short-term verbal memory. Okay, so what that means is if you give them a sentence of information, the cat sat on the mat, whatever that is, actually that might go in, they might have heard it, it's gone into their brain, it's gone into their phonological loop, and it's sat in that space. Now they find it very, very hard then to hold on to that information and to process it and to keep it in their short-term memory. So what they're doing is whatever it is you've asked them to do with that sentence is they're so busy just trying to hang on to the words, because it's a really hard thing to hang on to because they've been listening to it, and then to form those new words, that they then find it very hard to do anything with the information. Which means if you give them that information in a visual form, they've got it in front of them, it doesn't disappear, they don't have to hang on to it in their short-term memory, they've got it right there. So they can use that memory and they can use that phonological loop, they can use their processing skills to deal with the request because they've got that information visually in front of them. So they've actually then got a chance of doing whatever the task is that you've asked them to do. So just remember that it's really, really tricky. And one way of looking at that is we've had it before where someone has asked us to memorize an amount of digits, so the beginning of a phone number. And I think technically most adults will be able to manage 5 to 7 digit numbers relatively well. If I gave you a set of numbers, you'd remember it around 5 to 7 digits pretty well. Now, for our guys with Down syndrome, you're looking at 1, 2, 3 digits before you've got no chance of them remembering it again, because they can't store it and then do something with it. So make sure you're aware of that when you're working with them. Now, the other key thing is around having difficulties in expressive language is, like I said, is the risk of them being massively underestimated into what their cognitive skills might be, which then in turn can lead to behavior problems. Because if you've got a child who is just fed up at being, they're not being stretched, they're not being engaged, because actually they're like, I know this, but they haven't got the expressive language to tell you that or to support that, then you're going to have issues along that side. So just be super aware of it. So the solutions to things like that is kind of using signs, using symbols, using the written word to support understanding. And also, I'm sure you've heard this with a million other people as well. This isn't unique to children with Down syndrome, but it is specifically an issue for our guys, is allowing those longer wait times for responses, and modeling back the correct speech to them afterwards is also really key. So what you need to be doing is asking your request or giving your request. And you need to be really waiting and counting that 10 seconds quietly in your head. And it's such a long time, and it feels awkward, and it feels weird, and it feels difficult. But you've got to give them that space, and almost in your mind, just imagine them kind of putting it in their brain. They're just working it through. Because if you rephrase that question, the same question, but you rephrase it differently and give it back to them thinking you're helping, you've restarted them all over again. And now they've got to start from the beginning again and then create a bit of a cycle. So, you may be uncomfortable with that level of silence, but, we are the adults in this situation. So we just need to learn to be uncomfortable and to wait for that time to come to them. And then you will see a big impact if you do that. So, moving on. The next area to talk about is memory and cognitive processing. So this links really heavily with that kind of phonological loop we were talking about earlier. So actually young children with Down syndrome tend to have quite a strong long-term memory. They also have a really strong visual spatial memory. So they're really good at memorizing visuals. So even if you give them a visual to look at and remember, that doesn't take up all of their working memory. It's that verbal input that's taking up all of their working memory. So give them a visual. That again links into why reading is such a strength for them as well. So they've got strong long-term and visual spatial memory, but a really weak verbal working memory. Super important to remember. So they are going to be processing delays required, breaking your tasks into much, much smaller steps if you are doing it through verbal memory, to making sure that they can do that. So it's just, again, using those clear step-by-step instructions, using your visuals, using your gestures, and looking at that. And the other one is actually around motor skills and health. So fine motor delays affect handwriting and manipulation skills. So please, while we say sometimes writing can be a strength, I think what we really mean is kind of being able to express ourselves through the written word can be a strength. That it doesn't have to be writing. It might be typing on a computer, it might be typing. Actually, a lot of our guys are exceptionally IT savvy, so they might be better on an iPad than you are. But actually they also can use things like typing on keyboards, etc. And that's much easier, because just remember, if you are looking at getting them to tasks that, maybe in their later years, if you're looking at them to write something, just think, what is my learning outcome here? Is my learning outcome that they can form those letters correctly? In which case, crack on, brilliant, do that. But if my learning outcome is, can they show me that they know about the environment or about whatever else it is that you're teaching, then make sure that you are delivering that task in a way where they can tell you without having to do something that they find really difficult. Handwriting, that fine manipulation skills can be so, so tough. And so many times I've walked in, they said, they found that task really hard. And then when I sat down with them and kind of given them different ways to access that learning and ask them questions through giving them choices or using clothes where they've got to fill in the gaps, or if they've got to do a matching activity, or they can use things like concept cards to match things, looking at that, I'm like, they absolutely know that. What they were finding really hard was the writing itself. And often that's when they get bored, and that's when things can get tricky in terms of behavior as well. And the last one is a really, really important one, which I think often gets forgotten. And as a parent, it's one of the ones that I find really frustrating because it's easier for me. It's easier for me as a mum to be able to know, oh, we're not right today. This isn't a good day. Our children are not good at expressing pain. They're also not very good at identifying where pain comes from. And it actually doesn't always show itself in the same way as it might do for typically developing peers. So if they've got a pain somewhere, often they don't necessarily feel it specifically in one area. It might be kind of for them coming across as a diffuse pain. They don't really understand. They find it very hard to then label it as pain or discomfort, which inevitably leads to things like changing the behaviour. And one of the key things I want to throw up here, there'll be lots of reasons why our guys might have pain. It might be around some of our guys are very hypermobile, therefore they're more likely to have things like joint pain, particularly in those growing stages. But one of them big issues for our guys that affects such a huge proportion of them and is so underdiagnosed and undertreated is issues around constipation. Now, they may have been like it for so long their parents don't even recognise it, but a huge amount of our young people do suffer from chronic constipation, and actually the impact of that on their toilet training as well. So if you've got someone that's struggling to toilet train, please make sure that they're actually being properly investigated for things like constipation, because it does have quite a different presentation to the general population as well, so it often gets missed. If you've got a child who is having periods where their behaviour is suddenly plummeted, they're not engaged, you've looked at their hearing, you've looked at other things, they consider things like constipation, consider pain, consider those other issues that might be going on. And it might be that if you know those days are coming, that you're just tweaking what you're doing and changing the expectations of that day, making things a bit shorter, a little bit sharper for them, so that they can best access whatever it is that you're doing in that lesson that day. So yeah, be really vigilant for signs of distress, and make sure you're maintaining really close links with parents around that as well. So how is all of that going to affect our teaching strategies? Well, first of all, visual supports. Okay, I've talked about it all the way through and I'm going to keep going with it. We need to be using high contrast materials, big fonts, clear visuals. You can see a little picture on the side that's actually from our Learning for Life Series 1, where they're talking about public and private places. Making sure that we are using things like widget. So everything we do is supported by widgets. So widget symbols are in throughout all the projects that we run. We're not saying you have to use widget. You can use other symbol communication systems. Please make sure there's some level of consistency across that. Having said that, children with Down syndrome tend to be much more adaptable to that than maybe children with other diagnoses like autism, etc. They're pretty good at switching between things, as long as there's consistency between home and school and what they're doing. It's not an issue if you're swapping too much around. We're then also saying about using your visual aids with tactile and kinesthetic activities, so getting them learning that multi-sensory learning approach and trying to keep that as much as possible. Obviously as they get older, that becomes more difficult when you're in a secondary environment, but it's not impossible. It's having things where they can, touch, move, do, and express their learning. Structured routines. Our guys love a bit of structure. And frankly, who doesn't? I love a bit of structure sometimes, but predictable schedules really help anxiety. And actually anxiety is something we're seeing with our population, like across all children and people, I think, more and more, particularly if there are quite high expectations. We want high expectations, absolutely, but I think particularly where they don't really understand what they're doing next or where they're going to be, that can really help. And I think also talking to home about that and helping home to put those things in place. And very quickly, we used to do it when Bethan was younger because we knew we needed to. We used visual timetables at home, all that stuff. And then she moved to secondary. She thought, well, you're grown up now, don't need that stuff. And we found over a period of a good couple of years, actually, life was getting significantly more difficult at home. Getting her to do whatever needed to be done was difficult. Getting her to move on was difficult. And one particularly difficult week went, right, fine, we're going back to basics. Let's do a visual timetable. Different child, well, different young adult. Much easier to move around, get to do things. She was accepting of things. She got to be part of like what was going on the timetable. You know, she could help structure it. She could express herself through it. So what I would say is don't let those things slip as they get older. Don't underestimate when you think, oh, I don't need it anymore. It's gone. You might not need it to get through the day, but actually it will really strongly support their emotional state. And if you've got someone that's in a stronger emotional state, you're going to have a child that can access learning better. So we all know that. So structured routines, key. Visuals, key. Classroom arrangements. Now, this is the one where I said some of these strengths of children and young people will become weaknesses when they're in a specialist setting. So far, everything can be done in a mainstream or specialist setting. That's not an issue. However, classroom arrangements, and again, this is where some of the professionals might go, what? Are you kidding? The answer is no, I'm not kidding. All the research supports it, all the professionals support it. It's something that really does work. Classroom arrangements. Do not take your child with Down syndrome and place them in a group of lower ability, potentially less engaged individuals. Because one of the massive strengths of our community is to learn by looking and learn by imitation. And I will use this as an example again. Apologies for using my daughter's way through, but it's easy because she's mine and I'm allowed to talk about it. Is we had a phone call from school the other day saying, oh, I just wanted to let you know, Bethan's in the medical room. We've had a bit of an issue. No one saw her go, but apparently she's fainted. And I was like, oh, that's really quite concerning. She doesn't faint. That's not a thing. And what are we going to do about this? And then they said, well, we can't tell you too much, but I can tell you she was with another child who does fake faint quite a lot. And I was like, oh, right. Okay, well, this will take a few weeks to get out now because Bethan will absolutely imitate the people she was with. And it's not just her, it is our whole community. So if you've got one child that is disruptive and under the table and you have them in the same groups and the same settings as the child with Down syndrome, what you've done there is giving yourself two children under the table and disrupting the setting. However, if you are going to realistically, particularly as they move through the year groups, you're going to be differentiating out the work regardless for that child with Down syndrome. They're going to need a different way of accessing the same type of work. Now, note there, I didn't say different work. I said a different way of accessing the same work. And that's also really key. We don't have time to cover differentiation today, but something we're also super passionate about. If you're going to differentiate anyway, why not and you are often going to have additional support for that child with Down syndrome in the class. We would absolutely hope that you do. Is why not put them in your most able group where they have peers and role models to work alongside and then differentiate that work out. Like we said, we're not looking to close the gap. We're looking to make sure that child progresses sensibly and is progressing to the best of their ability. No, we're not looking to try and bring the child with Down syndrome up to the level of their peers. That's not what this is about. But placing them in your most able groups is often the most successful way of fully including a child with Down syndrome into your lessons. And it has a really, really strong effect. And actually, you know what? The guys in those groups often really benefit from it too, in a ways of being able to support that child and young person, but also then you're getting that imitation of behavior. The whole place is more settled. So I would really, really consider the role models that you are giving that child, because you reap what you sow. So if you decide that they are going to, in the same way, this is really important. And if you, are watching this and you think, oh, that's what we do with the child that we're working with, I would really strongly suggest that you take a really good, long, hard look at your reasoning as to why and that you seek specialist support. So if you have a child that is in year 3, 4, 5, 10, whatever year group they're in, who is spending the morning or spending a certain amount of time in the lesson, in the class with all the children, and then is going down to a lower year group to access play-based learning, or to access larger equipment learning, or to access whatever your reasoning is for why they are going down there, which I have no doubt is from a really good place and potentially has some benefit to the child. What you've done is you've taken a child who has roles and role models and behaviour expectations of a year 3 child for the morning. You've then sent them back where the behaviour expectations are significantly different. And then you've brought them back into a situation where their behaviour expectations are then of an older child. What happens over time is the behaviour spirals, because they don't know what behaviour set is expected of them. You can't expect them to switch up their behaviour to suit each one. And they also very quickly come to believe they don't belong in that class, because they're like, well, I'm only a visitor here. I go somewhere else and I come back. So I would suggest there are ways of accessing the benefits that you're looking for by coming into a lower year group differently. And I would really strongly suggest you get some specialist support around that, because it inevitably, if we go in and support someone and that is insisted upon, you know that child's not long for that setting, because that's not a setting that is building a long-term scaffold to support a child through their inclusive education. That's a setting that's trying to make do until that child moves into special school, you know, and we just have to be honest about it. There's no point kind of going around the bush with it. You've just got to be honest and say, actually, is this the best thing for this child? So this is the other thing, teaching assistants, working with teaching assistants. Now, obviously, our guys are going to need high levels of teaching assistant support. That mustn't come at the cost of quality first teaching. I'm not going to preach to you on that. You will all absolutely know this. It mustn't come at you know, at the risk of the teachers not getting involved with these children. However, teaching assistants have got a really tough job, I think, with this one, because they have got to balance supporting the child enough so that they can access their learning, but also supporting them in a way that is giving them as much independence and high expectation of behaviour and inclusion with their peers as possible. I would say 90% of the time when we have gone in and talked to families, we've talked to teachers, we've talked to children, if I ask that child, who's your best friend? 90% of them will say it's Miss so-and-so, or it's Mr. so-and-so. Or if you give them a choice with who you're going to spend time with, these children or these adults, they will choose the adults, because they find it easier to communicate and engage with adults. And that's because the communication issues, it's, you know, all those other things that we just talked about all wrapped into one. And actually, it's really important that our children learn from a really young age that teachers and teaching assistants are not our friends. We need to build friends. You need to be giving opportunities to build social interactions and to support that. So if you have got a teaching assistant supporting a child during playtime, you know, are they supporting the child, or are they supporting the child to access their peers? So are they setting up a game where a lot of people can come and join in and they can be part of that social interaction, or are they setting up a game specifically for the child that then actually isolates them a little bit more? So it's about building as many opportunities into the day for independence as possible, whether that be doing through jobs. And the other thing is looking at, I know sometimes it's really tough from an employment point of view, but having one teaching assistant assigned to the same child all day, every day, is often a recipe for disaster. 2 reasons. Oh, well, so many reasons actually, but 2 main reasons. It's really tough for the adult, actually, emotionally, and actually from a lot of different reasons. It's tough for an adult to do that all day, every day. And then what you end up is burnout of TAs, you then get high turnover of staff. It can be quite tough. Also, if that TA for whatever reason is unwell, not available, you know, the whole support system has fallen apart. and you haven't got anyone to kind of cross that in. You've also got someone that potentially is being upskilled in lots of different ways that can support a big wide range of children, young people. So you might be getting someone that has done some training around learning profile of child with Down syndrome, they're doing some training in speech and language, they're going to speech and language sessions and coming back and delivering the support. You might then really be upskilling this one person. And unfortunately, if that one person isn't available, you've lost all of those skills and all of that input. So we do recommend that it's a minimum of 2 teaching assistants working with the child. Also, the child often becomes very overly dependent on that one person, to the point where they then will stop listening to other members of staff throughout the school around behaviour, and then that one person is called to deal with the behaviour. So just be really careful around there. And this other one, the last one that I'm going to talk to you about today, about teaching strategies, is errorless learning. Now, children, you'll see this a lot in the Teach Me Too, particularly when you watch Trina working with the younger children. She'll often, before they've, you might feel like she's jumping in too early, but actually she knows her guys and she knows what levels they're working at and she knows their reactions. Really brilliant at keying into their reactions, where they're looking, whether they're just that little movement of the hand, what they're doing. And it's about errorless learning and making sure that our children, young people are, succeeding in whichever the task it is. Fear of failure and poor reaction to fear of failure is massive for our community. Like, they really, and again, this is a huge kind of putting everyone into a swathe of a group. I recognise they will have unique learners within there, but the vast majority will find getting an answer wrong, particularly when they're younger, very difficult, and particularly when they're learning a new topic. So you will see Trina when she works with the Teach Me Too team in the Maths Before Numbers series, where she will go, oh, great, yes, you're right, great looking. And actually what they've done is they've looked the right answer, but they haven't quite been brave enough yet to put their hand out and do it. But she will praise them and say, yes, you've done it. And even if they're going for the wrong answer, you'll see her kind of swiftly but gently kind of re-guide their hand so that they've got the right answer. And yes, well done, that's brilliant, and about praise and reinforcement. So wherever you can, errorless learning is really, really key for our young people. Okay, so moving on then to look at reading. Okay, so first of all, why are we looking at reading? Well, like I said, visual strength and reading is a massive strength for our children. It is also, when you have expressive vocabulary issues, a really great way of accessing what they know. And it's also something where the evidence base is huge. Okay, so we have done lots of evidence on this. We're starting to really understand it. Okay, so what the evidence shows us is that whole word reading approach for children and young people with Down syndrome is the most effective way of introducing the vast majority of children with Down syndrome to reading. What I have not said there, and that's really important, is I have not said that it should be used instead of phonics. Phonics is built through our education system. So to exclude a child from phonics learning would not be to include that child. Also, as they get further through their reading journey, they are going to need to understand their phonics to be able to decode more complicated words or unknown words as they get older. So really, really important. Secondly, phonics is also really important because if you think about how we teach phonics and what it is, the impact of things on speech and language for understanding phonics, really key. So you're still teaching phonics because they're going to need it at some point in their reading journey, but also it can really support their language journey. So what we are saying is, with reading, what you need is a as well as approach. So, what we recommend is looking at whole word reading. So what is whole word reading? Now, for a lot of you will already know this, but essentially it's kind of the old school way of teaching reading a little bit. So learners recognize words as complete visual images. So rather than thinking about them as breaking them down into phonemes and then putting them back together again, or looking at each individual letter and being able to identify it and then knowing that word, they literally look at the word as a picture. It's one whole picture, which is why sometimes our guys find words that you would never normally start with, we would start with different sets of words. So we would never start with things like, the CVC words are sit, sit, pin, hat, all of that kind of stuff that we start with naturally when we're learning phonics, because, sit and pit look very similar to each other if you put them next to each other. Or if you're learning two words and one of them says elephant and one of them says hat, very quickly you will know that elephant is different to hat, and you can see the difference. It's a really strong visual difference for them. And so actually sometimes those words like names of people they love, family members, things that engage them are actually the first words that we start with, rather than those early words that you might start with naturally through a phonics scheme. So it's really important to remember that with whole word reading, they're not breaking each letter down. You're not asking them to break each letter down. So you shouldn't be asking to kind of, if they're struggling with it, there's no point kind of going, so what's this letter? What's this letter? Because that's not what you're asking them. You're asking them to learn that that picture means that word. Okay, and then that builds them a nice strong base of vocabulary that they can use to access reading, and then they can start to use their phonics skills as those build to decode unknown words. So it's about having several strands, and there are reading schemes out there specifically for children with Down syndrome if you want to follow a really structured scheme. So there's a reading and language intervention run by Down Syndrome Education International, which you can buy the resources for. There's books called the POPs books as well. There's resources out there for you to go and look at. There's a See and Learn approach to reading as well. If you're getting people right at the beginning of their journey for reading, See and Learn is very much this whole word reading approach. You can do that. But again, you can just make it yourself. You can do this yourself. And, it's totally up to you how you do that. So looking a bit kind of closer at what that means in terms of stages, what it really means is starting off with image matching. So actually taking things, particularly if you can use photos rather than pictures, that really helps our guys as well. So start with photos, start with family members, start with their pets, start with things that engage them, and literally looking at starting to learn to match. And actually and we do this throughout lots of the videos on Teach Me To, but one of the most recent one was a whole matching section on the Maths Before Numbers side, and you can get all the cards to do all the matching as well as part of that. So if that's something that you'd be interested in, you can do that. But it's looking at matching images. Now, I would suggest that that image also has the word underneath it as well to start with. There's no harm in that. You would do that. So say you've got a picture of, say someone, they're really obsessed with cats and dogs. You might have a picture of a cat and then the word cat written underneath it. Now, because we know about these issues of visual acuity, obviously you're not going to write the word cat over the picture of cat. It is going to be a picture of a cat and then a nice, plain white block with strong font, nice clear writing, nice large font underneath cat, so that you've dealt with that visual acuity issue. You're also not going to print these out small. You're going to print them out nice and big so they're easy to pick up. Remember, we've got fine motor skills issues here as well. So picking up bits of card and whatever else can be tricky. So we're going to print them big. We're going to write it clear. And we're going to have pictures of things that they find engaging. And we're going to get them used to being able to do a really simple matching activity where they're matching one picture with another picture. Okay, that's stage one. So now if you're at the point where your child is successfully matching image to image, then you're ready for the next stage. The next stage is you take those images that you've been working on, and I wouldn't suggest a lot of images to start with. You might only be starting with 4 different images, okay? You then do the same thing, but with the word. So you write the word, again, it's big, it's bold, it's clear, and it's on a big bit of easily accessible bit of paper or with laminated or whatever it is. You've thought about those things. And then you're then getting them to match it. Okay, so you're literally saying, put cat on cat. And you're saying, and then if they're, again, we're using error learning when we're doing this as well, aren't we? So if they're picking up cat and they're heading towards dog, you're grabbing that hand, you're kind of going, yes, cat, well done, that's brilliant, that's cat, yes. We're giving them lots and lots of praise. We're giving them lots of signs through our body language as well that we're pleased, and that we've got the face, we've got the hands, we've got it all going on, saying, yes, it's cat, well done. And we're making sure, and it might even be that you've got a child that's quite nervous that actually is getting cat, and they're just using their, hard to do on Zoom, I recognize, they're just using their eyes to like look at cat, and they're just going back, and you're like, yes, you're right, that's cat. And you're using that to then build their confidence over time. Okay, so if they've got to the point where they are matching images, they're then able to match words. And again, please use things that look quite different to each other. Like I said, don't start with hat and mat, because that makes it very difficult for them. You know, that's why sometimes names like mummy, daddy, brothers, sisters, whatever it is, often work. Depends what motivates the child as well. So please use things that they are interested in. You know, one of the things they're most interested in often is themselves. So make sure you're putting them in there too. Very keen on stuff that includes themselves often, as aren't we all, let's be honest. So you've now got to the point where you can match word to word. That's when you start to move on to the point where you take the image and the word, and you're asking them to match it that way. So put cat on cat, and you're looking for them to either put the image on the word or the word on the image and start to label. And they will very quickly start to, well, hopefully quickly start to pick this up. If not, it's just about repetition. It's about doing it in different ways. It doesn't just have to be a boring sit in front of you and do matching. It can be a fishing game. It can be so many different ways of doing it. It could be everyone loves a postbox games. You know, you guys will be the specialists in making things into games and making it fun and making it engaging. I don't need to tell you how to do that part of your job. You're totally all over that. So just, you know, make it engaging and active, but there is going to need to be a lot of repetition. And then they're doing that. And it's at that point, then you can look at if they can, you can show them the word and they can say it or sign it back to them, which again, when you've been doing your images and when you've been doing your words, of course, you've been supporting that with the sign for that word. So just because a child can't say a word doesn't mean we should be holding them back from reading a word. Okay, super, super important. So actually a lot of the evidence around reading for children with Down syndrome is a lot of them will read first before they talk, and that reading itself improves their speech and language outcomes. Again, for my daughter, she uses a talker, Voca, where she can go through, and the times where she's put a sentence together on the talker and then read it back to me, language is a million times clearer than if she's trying to say it without the visual support of her words. So please, please, please don't be holding back anyone from reading because they don't have the language. They can show you through other ways, okay? And they can show, even if it's you're giving them the word, you're holding up the word cat, and they've got a whole lot of options out on the table of images, and they're choosing that one to show you that they know what cat means. No, they can still do that. And then it's putting into things like very short phrases, personalized books. It might be a picture with a short phrase underneath it, you know, looking at how you can personalize that for the children, how it can make sense, you know. So where we're starting with those more meaningful words for them, maybe we haven't got those early reading words we would use with the others, we still need to make sure that at some point quite soon we're building in some of those other words like the, in, you know, once they've got those kind of keywords, you're doing word-to-word matching so that they can access those sentences, looking at that. But that's a bit further down the line. To start with, you're just looking at getting them the basic vocabulary that they can then use and you can put in the book. So please look at things like the See and Learn. Please, lots of resources online. There's some brilliant videos. The Canadian Down Syndrome Association do some awesome videos on reading. So please go and look at those as well. Really, really important. So making it engaging, you know, looking back at that, we're looking at making it relevant to the child's world, making sure that it's actually engaging for them. And the other thing is actually being very practical. Well, my house was ridiculous when my child was younger, because things like labeling objects can be really, really helpful with the written word. So, you know, even our oven had the word oven written on it. Everyone used to come in, why is your sofa labelled sofa? You have to say, yeah, because actually they get used to seeing that written word. So if you've got a classroom environment, you're going to do no harm to the rest of your class. And you may really support them by labelling up things with the written word and supporting our children to access different things. Again, just to reiterate, we're not dropping phonics. We're doing both, but phonics does remain essential for long-term literacy skills. And then what we're also doing from day one is we're tracking progress, because sometimes what happens is we start with words and we get all excited, we kind of carry on, it's going great. And then someone comes in and says, well, how many words have they got? What do they know? And we're like, oh, I don't know. I think they know this. I'm not really sure. So what actually, if you start from day one, and we've got a download that you can get in touch with us, we can always pass it on to you, around tracking progress in terms of words. It's as simple as having a column on one side with the first words that you're using. We start off maybe 4 or 5 words, and then very quickly you're working chunks of 10 words. Okay, so you'd have the words that you're working on down one column, you'd have the dates along the other column, and you would be either ticking off or using a code to say whether it was image matching, word matching, or picture to word matching, and how successful it was on those words. And very quickly you'll get to the point where, for 10 sessions running, they got the word dog right first time, every time. Okay, so we've then moved the word dog from new words, and we love a bit of stationery. So, I do anyway. I think it's kind of a bit around people that work in education who love stationery. It's about having some folders, etc., available to you, labeled up nicely with things like, and you can call these what you like. Different people call them different things. I tend to call them like new words, known words, mastered words. So we're moving things from the new words into the known words. And once that they know them and they can consistently do them, we're then putting in another new word. So we're still working on 10 new words. Okay. And then what you will then be doing is with the known words, we don't put them in known and never revisit them. We put them in known, and we know that a couple of sessions a week, we need to go back to known words, pick out 10 and just reassess where we are with them. And then if we're still consistently getting those right, then at any point, actually we found they've dropped out of that memory and they're not there anymore, we can go back, they can go back in new words. If we're still finding that they're really secure in those words, we can move them over into mastered, so that actually we know that those are mastered. And again, we don't ever leave the mastered list to rot over there. We're looking at every now and then, every couple of weeks, there's a mastered note word session where we're bringing out, or it might be that we bring it into the new word session. For every session we do with the new words, we put in 1 mastered word and 3 known words, just to kind of make sure that we're recording that on the list again, so that you know exactly how many words they've got in each section. And again, make sure that you're planning your words around what's going on in the classroom. So what are the topics you're doing? If you know that next term you're doing the Egyptians, again, we're not being held back by these kind of early words. So we can use all the language used we know is going to come up in the Egyptians. We can put in pyramids and tombs and Egyptians and whatever it might be, so that they've pre-learnt that language and those words, so that when you go and do a topic next term, they've got a chance of accessing that curriculum. So use it as an opportunity to pre-teach topic words as well. Share it with home. Actually, I can tell you right now, as a mum, getting my child to sit down and read a book they don't care about, tricky. Getting my child to do flashcards of things they're interested in as a quick one to kind of keep their vocab up, or to do a personalized book where you've got a picture of whatever it is going on. We used to do this for our daughter in the days where there was something called special eye apps around. Unfortunately, it's not around anymore, but you can do it on things like Canva, and there's loads of other places where you can do it, where we would go out for the day, we'd take photos or whatever in the holiday, and it would be, we just put a photo on each page, and the sentence underneath was, I went to the park. I saw my friend Alice. So then when she could take that book back in, she could share it with her class, share it with her friends. It gave them a bit of way to communicate what she'd done. She was really engaged in it because she was proud of it. It helped her reading, so please do share between home and school what words she's got and hasn't got, what she needs or what they need, and how you can support them. It becomes a really nice way. We kind of would really recommend using something what we call a conversation diary, for our children. Even at the very beginning, it's just getting to the point where you can have a book, same way you do homeschool diary, or even the same one. You put a picture in it that they've done that day, and then together you write that sentence out, you read it, it goes home. Mum or dad or carers, whoever it is at home, look at the photo. And it also gives them an in about, you know, talking and interacting with their child about what's gone on in the day, because it's really hard as a parent to be able to do that. So have a little think about conversation diaries as well. Lots more information out there about those. So we're running out of time. So just to kind of recap today's session, if you'd like to go and look at the free Teach Me To and Learning for Life projects, please do. It's over on our website. So just Google Learn and Thrive and you will find us. Thank you very much for coming along today. The key takeaways that I really want you to take from today is actually using those visual strengths, you know, considering inclusive education. And if you are in a specialist setting, making sure that you are aware of the issues around imitation of behaviour, but also that you are remaining aspirational in terms of outcomes for your children, but also that you're still using the learning profile specific strategies that particularly around reading as well in special educations. So implement these strategies in your classroom, evaluate your current teaching approaches and make some necessary kind of adjustments and changes. You know, it doesn't have to be a complete change. This might just be about tweaking how you're doing things. Really collaborate between your families and your teaching assistants and your SENCOs. Like use that time to really collaborate, because that relationship between home and school is so important. And, you know, access the free teaching tools, Learn and Thrive. The other places I would say to go and get some more information, again, the Down Syndrome International Guidelines that I've talked about earlier. Well, so there's lots of information that you can go and access from them. So please do that. And if you'd like any more information, please use the QR code. And my last point is, you know, thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of it today. If there's anything you'd like to feed back to us, please do. And please keep in mind that Learn and Thrive is a charity. Everything we do is free, and we are absolutely reliant on schools, individuals, people coming on board and helping us fundraise. So if there's any way that you can help support us to continue doing what we do for free, because it's such a hard sector right now, we would really, really appreciate any of your time. Okay, thanks.
Massive thank you to Joanne for that session. I am aware of the fact that it is 22 minutes past 5 and we've overrun, as we normally do, because we're quite good at doing that. Joanne has some really interesting things to say there that helped us to understand Down syndrome, that visual aspect of working with our students, the issues around glue ear and being able to relate those to reading, and lots of practical examples there. So hopefully everybody managed to take something away from today's session that they can then go and use in their own schools. And of course, there's always more to learn. So please do go over to the Learn and Thrive website and have a look at what they've got over there. And like ourselves, we're a CIC, they're a charity. So we're doing this together to raise awareness, to support both organisations together. So we really have to thank Joanne for her time today. So thank you, Joanne. Gavin, what have we got coming up next week?
Next week we have, I can't hear me because you're on your problem.
Okay, sorry. So next week we have got, on the Wednesday, I'm hosting a session for Nexus and Gavin's hosting a session on deaf awareness at the same time, and you get to meet Gavin's sister. That's just going to be really strange. And on Thursday, I'm delivering a session on normal way of working, I think it is. That's next week. This Thursday is developing your TAs. So we're moving on from our gold dust analogy and building it up a little bit further.
There you go. See, she remembered them all.
I think I remember them all. If it's not that, I'll just make it up on the spot like I usually do. Anyway, everybody take care. Have a great evening. I'm going to go and find some food because my tummy is rumbling. Bye-bye.